The Network Effect, Connecting the Dots of Crisis Communication. In this webinar, our presenters will examine how connectivity and information sharing improves crisis response. And now, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Dr. Robert Chandler is Professor of Communication and Director of the Nicholson School of Communication at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Chandler is also the Principal Researcher and Director of the Center for Crisis Communication at the Nicholson School. Dr. Chandler has studied crisis communication, leadership, teamwork, decision-making, psychometric variables during crises, and emergency communication. He has also reviewed specific areas of crisis and incident notification, warning messages, cognitive processing, and message comprehension. Dr. Chandler has developed several widely used planning models for crisis and emergency communication, including communication planning for the 6 stages of a crisis, the 3-3-30 principle for incident notification, the Chandler method of incident notification messages, and message mapping, the Chandler model. Dr. Chandler is an internationally recognized researcher with more than 150 academic and professional papers, including widely circulated white papers on emergency and crisis communication. His works have been published in more than 75 academic and scholarly journals, and he is the author or co-author of 8 books, including his most recent, in 2010, Emergency Notification. Dr. Chandler is a sought-after speaker, presenter, trainer, and seminar leader. He also hosts the annual International Crisis and Risk Communication Conference held every March in Orlando, Florida. After Dr. Chandler's presentation, we'll be hearing from Claudia Dent, Vice President of Product Management at Everbridge. Claudia has many years of experience in the technology industry and has held executive positions in product management, marketing, business development, and general management at companies ranging from startups to large global enterprises. And we're excited and extremely honored to have both of our speakers here with us today. So now I would like to pass it over to our first presenter, Dr. Chandler. Dr. Chandler, you may begin.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for asking me to come and talk about this topic. It's certainly right down my areas of interest, and so I'm kind of excited about this. One of the things that I've noticed in the years that I've been writing and researching and lecturing and teaching in this field is how the impact of changes both in usage patterns, norms, expectations of individuals who communicate, either sending messages, receiving messages, as well as, perhaps most dramatically, the technology has evolved. I'm not even going to get started on how much it's changed because it'll give away my age very quickly. One of the things that's kind of exciting, though, is the emergence now of what I consider to be a heightened level of connectivity. The options for connectivity continue to expand almost exponentially in terms of mobile messaging and cellular technology and online presence and the ubiquity of the connectivity and, of course, the accessibility of it. And it's begun to suggest new paradigms, new ways of looking at communication. And this topic today is one of those new emerging paradigms. And so I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the concept of networking, and I guess we're all sort of familiar with that, a matrix of connectivity at different levels that allows us to exchange not only information but to get to higher order types of collaboration, decision-making, input, a synthesis of perspectives that was really not possible prior to some of the modern technology and communication tools. But also specifically to talk about that as we think about collaboration within an organization, beyond an organization, and how we coordinate various sometimes decoupled units and people and processes and groups in order for successful or effective crisis management and, of course, my field for better communication towards that end. That's really what I want to try to do and talk through, and that's really it in a nutshell. So let's start with the most obvious and the basic. Crisis happens. That's kind of a play on an old bumper sticker. It really does. But when these events happen, when an incident begins, when an accident, a criminal action, a industrial accident, a weather emergency, a terrorist act, a illness outbreak, a reputational disaster, it really doesn't matter. One of the things that we know is that our connection to other people is very valuable. In fact, it's one of our most valuable assets. And let's start just from the informational aspect. Dr. Larry Barton's done some work that indicates that during the golden period, the very first part of after an incident happens, what I would call that beginning part of the response phase, that the information that is often received or shared or passed along or passed up, if that's your chain of command, it's fraught with inaccuracies. It's just simply contains errors. It's wrong on many things. In fact, Larry's research indicates that the peak moments early in a stage of a crisis, he has found where nearly more than 3/4 of the information that is provided turns out later to simply be wrong. Now, some of those mistakes are slight, I concede that, but a number of them are quite relevant and critical to trying to figure out how you're going to respond, making good decisions, and in turn, sharing that information. I mean, they range from simple inaccuracies of timing or number counts or head counts or status condition reports to some really tragic examples of how the information in the early stages can be wrong and communication breakdowns. You could be sending people to the wrong location. You could be actually directing them further into harm's way. There's so many things here. And because of the information inaccuracies, because of the limits of sort of traditional reporting chains of command, the way that we've done it for so long, we certainly know the capacity limits. In fact, the communication breakdowns is one of the most frequently mentioned problems or challenges of I didn't know, you didn't tell me, why didn't you share that, it didn't get to me fast enough, look, these are just the capacity limits of what we're doing. So if we look at this and we look at the challenge of those interactions, what we're really asking with this, looking at this matrix of a larger potential network, is there a way to integrate the types of approaches that we use, who we connect, how we connect them, to better utilize that information and connect that information together. And then the question comes down to who can utilize and what organizations and what levels of an organization, their involvement in this hyperconnectivity and what the benefits are. And that's really what we're going to talk about today and try to answer questions as they pop up. Crises, by their very nature, occur suddenly, sometimes without warning. Occasionally you get a warning. They can happen just about to anyone, anywhere, anytime. There's no way of thinking that you're immune from them. As I mentioned, crises come in many different forms: disasters, emergencies, incidents. They can escalate. They can start out small and grow. They could have been contained rather quickly, but perhaps without that sort of containment to them, that they're allowed to continue to expand and grow. The crisis itself could be of any sort, and really what I'm talking about today really does apply to any type of event or incident. It doesn't matter if it's a weather situation, it doesn't matter if it's a huge reputational scandal. Every crisis involves certain risks, costs, threats, and opportunities, and I think that when you look at that, every single one of them, the management of them can be more effective if, in fact, you have, one, a wider access to instant, real-time, and more verifiable information. Two, a network of collaborative decision-making. Participative, collaborative decision-making is usually stronger than isolated decision-making. And three, it's a verification. It's a feedback network that you're allowed to verify and feedback choices that are made. If you can do that quicker, in real time, and if you can maximize it, I said leverage, if you can leverage the connectivity, then what you have is a better approach to not only communicating during a crisis, but actually managing the crisis itself. And that's true at all levels. And that's true with different people, because every crisis then affects different strata of individuals. If you will, consider concentric rings or circles. And as you expand that, you go beyond something that happens in a single room and one floor of one building and one office. And if you expand that to a floor or a building or multi-buildings and a multi-campus or a neighborhood or a city, a region, a nation, a worldwide calamity, obviously the value of networking continues to rise exponentially because your eyes and ears, your additional thoughts, your critical feedback, and yes, sometimes even disagreements and decisions that come are arrived at through that process can be stronger. And so actually, the bigger the crisis is, the even more valuable this is, but it works at any level. What we have found is that during particular kinds of incidents, having some way to better, I'm going to say double check or verify I think you should trust your internal channels. I don't think it's time to abandon them. I would not recommend that. But I guess to borrow a line from former President Reagan, yeah, trust and verify is a stronger posture to do. So as you get reports coming in, I don't think you simply toss them in the trash bin. But if you can find a way to more rapidly get other sources of information. We talked today about everything, what's the new phrase, crowd sourcing for stuff, whether it's raising money for an IPO or whether it's venture capital, whether it's deciding on what color your wedding color should be. We're using more and more larger communities to help us provide input, feedback, make decisions, and sometimes update things. It's really no different when we're talking about trying to connect to all of those who are involved, some of them literally on the ground with eyes and ears, but others of them in key decision-making places. The two goals that we have, one is accuracy. I wish I could say that information is always 1,000% accurate, but research indicates that it's not. In fact, I've mentioned Larry's work, Larry Barton's work. There's other researchers that talk about, they use words like noise and error factor, and that even when someone's telling you something, there's little tiny bits and pieces of it that are omitted. New things get added to it. If you've ever played the old junior high game, I guess we call it the telephone game. Some of you may have called it the post office. We had a completely different game for that title. That's where you sat in a circle. I don't know if you've ever done this or not. We usually use it for just teaching the problems of communication. And maybe one person tells the person sitting next to them and whispers in their ear a story, and you pass it around. One of the fun things about it is that inevitably that story will change. Pieces of it will be just gone by the time it gets to the end. They won't even be part of it anymore. No one's repeating it. Brand new things that weren't even part of the original story will be being told as the gospel truth by the time it reaches the end. And quite other things that are there suddenly are flipped around. They're upside down. It's like sending a message up from the bottom of a mine to the governor with families of the miners in a church, and it goes from no one survived. By the time it reaches, the governor walks in the room and makes the statement, everyone survived. How does that happen? We're shocked. We're stunned when that happens. And I just sit back and watch the news reports, and I watch the people agonize over how could such a communication mistake happen. And I just think back wistfully to those days of, no, we taught this in the telephone game. That's a lesson we should learn. So anything we can do to improve accuracy is obviously going to enable us to more successfully make decisions, manage crises, share with others, warn others, and do everything we want to do. One way that we overcome the accuracy problem, because there's always going to be stray stuff in, the degradation of information. No, there is nothing pure. You can't lock it. You can try to do feedback. You can double check. You can verify. These are all very valid things, but do not operate under the mistaken assumption that you can always make it purely accurate. This stuff creeps in. So what we use to counterbalance that is the concept of redundancy. You try to send the messages. You try to get your information more than one simple channel, because you're putting, what is the old phrase, all of your eggs in one basket. All of your stakes are relying on that one channel and constantly depending on how accurate it is. So what you do is you compensate. You begin to talk and listen in multiple ways. It's getting every perspective in. You would never make a solo decision. You want to get your team members in and make a great team decision. And this is just an expanded concept of that. Redundancy is that you don't just get your information from one source. You may really trust the news media. I remember once we were working an event out at my former campus out in Malibu, California, and I was sitting on campus and we were talking about crisis communication. I was working with a group, and I watched literally the television sets, national news, CNN, reporting that the Pepperdine campus was on fire. And we all looked at each other. We looked out the window. We looked around. We were just sitting there really kind of stunned. Really? Why are they reporting this? And we know why. I study communication. And of course they got it wrong. And they add to the fact the media is looking for sensationalism. But my point is, if you were relying strictly on one source without redundancy, without verification, without having somebody on the phone, eyes and ears there, without pulling it back to you, then you're really operating at high risk. You're playing a very high-stakes game. And now that we have this opportunity for networking, reaching out, interconnectivity at multiple levels for multiple directions of communication, we have a chance to really shore up and solidify our assumptions and get our accuracy levels up, build a redundant network that compensates when those little mistakes come in, that you can quickly discard them and say, we're not going to make a decision assuming our campus is on fire, because it's not on fire, despite what we're being told by a very authoritative source. And I think that's the best example I can give of this. So when we look at the traditional sources of information, whether you're talking about media, people in the field, you're waiting for an official statement from the Sheriff's Department or from the County Health Board. I mean, they're all wonderful. You're reading the paper, you're listening to traditional sources, your own people are sending you field reports. All of these things are useful, and I'm not suggesting you walk away from any of them. What I am suggesting is that now is a time with technology and a new perspective to think about really fortifying that, expanding that type of information sources that go beyond the limitations of these traditional communication connectives. Because over and over again, we find communication and communication breakdowns being a problem of it. I mentioned Larry's work earlier. My survey of after-action review has found consistently in more than 90% of after-action reviews for a whole variety of disasters that somewhere in there they mentioned communication. Something was misunderstood. I wasn't told. This was phrased wrong. We didn't get the word. That information wasn't provided. That it becomes a major significant factor in what goes wrong in many of these things, and it's a #1 area for improvement that's mentioned. There are others, but it is certainly at the top numerically in terms of we've got to work to make our communication better. I need to know that sooner, quicker. I need to know that more accurately. I can't make these decisions without having some sense of trusting the facts you're giving me. And this is really what today's topic is really addressing. How do you build resiliency into your communication network for both retrieving, for gathering, for getting information, your surveillance, your intelligence, your reports, and how can we accelerate the process so that we trust it better? And it is a time, a redundancy and an accuracy advantage, and that's really what we're talking about, going beyond the traditional methods, and that's kind of where it is. So the network effect, I think I've already kind of let the cat out of the bag, but think about it this way, is that at any point in time, we're dependent upon a wide and sometimes wider range of sources of information, people that we have to work with, collaborate with. It could run from law enforcement to interagency response, private sector, public sector, health departments. Those of you who have studied ICS command structure understand the idea of trying to bring in various units and how do you put them into a structure or an organizational model. In addition, we have not only the official things, we have some of them that are more important than others, but there's a wide range of them. We also now have this idea of groups within our own organization, teams, responders, engineers, lawyers. I'll give a shout out to them. We've got groups within our own organization with whom we need to keep more effective communication with. I don't need to find out 2 days later that this wasn't vetted or this was wrong or this is engineering an impossibility. It can't be done. Why did you promise that? And also you begin to go with employees to constituents to neighbors. And in fact, you even get to the point where the general public becomes part of this network. I don't know if you follow the sort of, the idea of the incident reporter, the network junkies, the social media explosion of people who are literally there saying, well, I've just snapped a picture of the plane crash. Here it is. This is happening. This is real time. There's smoke on my block. We can't breathe here. We're moving. Here is where the evacuation center is. There's so much now that's going on. In fact, the real danger is, of course, information overload. There is a vast sea of available information from different sources, areas. It's available more rapidly. And if you had a way to begin to look at it, to go beyond the traditional, I'm going to wait for the press briefing at 6 o'clock today from the sheriff's office, they're going to tell us what's going on. In fact, no one else is waiting. People are moving on and getting information, and it's really a new age. I mean, we really have entered a sea change moment. I believe that all of these kinds of disasters are now basically partly owned as a social media disaster. They exist in a virtual level, and tapping into that at all of these levels is one of the challenges. If we can do that, if we can tap into this without being overwhelmed by it, by not letting it overwhelm us, we can improve both our information, our decision-making, our cooperation, our collaboration, and our networking together. And that's my theoretical definition of the network effect. And I know Claudia is going to talk through some very specifics about the network effect in terms of the mechanics, but from a research, from a scholarly standpoint, this is very exciting in terms of what we're doing. So what does it allow us to do? Well, I throw out the word synergy. That was a buzzword when I was middle-aged. It's back in vogue now because what it gives us is a chance to do some things we've never been able to do before, do them quicker and in unique combinations. And that really comes from taking all these other traditional sources, integrating them with new sources of information, with new connections, sometimes direct connection. One of the biggest problems of that telephone game is that our message is mediated. It had to go through these other people before it got to you. And one of the things that's real exciting about the network effect is that you can eliminate many of those weak links in the chain, the gatekeepers, the bottlenecks, the person that didn't understand what was the important part of this, and they went someplace else with it. So when you look at this, what you're trying to do is deal with a complex and highly fragmented communication system to bring order to it. You're also trying to get people who are willing at different levels. That means, organizations, law enforcement agencies, healthcare units, people within your own organization, people outside your organization, even including the general public, who are there already providing a source of information and their willingness to connect to your network and provide information, or you can tap into theirs. And then, of course, to me, one of the real fundamental things from an organizational standpoint is the idea of building links, direct connections. We used to teach years ago in my graduate courses in business and organizational, we would talk about organizational charts. All of you have seen an organizational chart where there's little boxes and lines to them, and they're very structured and ordered and rational. I want you to think about this for just a second. Suppose if you follow the organizational chart, you have to wait for the message to go up one chain, be regurgitated, come down another chain. You see the kind of you see the implicit telephone game in that model. If you can visualize that, I'm actually suggesting drawing some dotted lines across that chart, whether that's within a department, a company, a business, a university, a state, a region, nationally. It doesn't matter to me. I'm talking about beginning to draw little dotted lines and networking with people in direct ways and tapping into information that goes beyond the lumbering formal channels of waiting for it to get reported and digested, and then maybe with errors and mistakes, then reported in the daily briefing 6 hours later. One is cumbersome. One is very light on its feet. One is much more nimble. And I think that's really, when we talk about interagency collaboration, coordination, information exchange, whether that's at the local or the regional level, one of the things that's exciting, if you can, in your mind's eye, visualize that org chart now, look at your ICS chart, if you can visualize it with all these great little dotted lines of direct connection, that's the network effect. That's the synergy that's possible. So where do you put these networks? Well, I mean, anywhere. But let me, I'm a college professor. I should lecture with points and notes, and we can freelance beyond that. You connect organization to organization. You connect an organization by that dotted line directly to an individual or to an occupant. You might connect that person back to the organization, or connect residents to each other and people to each other. One of the things that's exciting about these kind of direct connections that skip over, they're supplemental to, they are in addition to those traditional structure or chart lines, is that it does provide a whole new way of talking, interacting, and communicating. And by the way, this isn't this isn't like an invented concept. This is really looking at the way people are getting connected, connectivity, networking now, whether it's social media networks or online networks or common groups that come together to coordinate and collaborate. Any of those things can be part of it. It's really taking this in as a strategic planning tool as you think about your organization, your unit, your agency, your team, your whatever it fits. And I think that's what's happening with it. So what do we do with this? So this connection now comes at different levels. Obviously one thing that we just share is raw data. Nuts, bolts, bits, bytes. Numbers, events, directions, locations, GPS coordinates, data. And that's something now you can get much quicker. You don't have to stall with it. You don't have to deal with the fact it gets convoluted or dropped out or something new added in. You eliminate the telephone game stuff. You eliminate the fatigue. You eliminate the delay in the process, and you can move data back and forth across these things and give you something quicker that adds to, go back to our points, it helps with both accuracy and it builds in those levels of redundancy. It accomplishes all the things theoretically that we want to do to improve our communication. Then we get to information. We try to make this stuff meaningful. We begin to put the pieces together. What is this? And we begin to describe the data. We begin to characterize the data. We put labels on the data. And then, of course, you go to higher order actually knowledge, which is putting it in context, making it knowable, making it actionable, and actually knowledge is what's actionable of any of this stuff, where you bring sense to it, order, it's put in a larger paradigm. And then, of course, the ultimate is that where you use this very strategically, the wisdom level. You're trying to apply this information and use it consistently. So what does this allow us to do? The network effect allows us to build in and remove extraneous errors, mistakes, problems, increase the speed, and also increase the synergy, because we're not just doing this alone. We're being able to, well, I hate this, but we're being able to crowdsource this a bit more. And what happens is overall the erroneous information gets drowned out. Yes, you're still going to have people who inadvertently or maybe even deliberately put wrong information in. The point of this is that through the redundancy, through the overwhelming value of it, you quickly learn which to kind of push aside. That's not accurate. My building's not on fire. I'm sitting here, there's no fire. I don't really care what CNN's reporting. Let's get down to making an actionable decision. All of this is something that I think is facilitated by expanding the network. Now, I promised Claudia I need to hurry here. So, technological assimilation, to network this, you have the theoretical concept. Now we have to get the tools. We have to know how we connect. We need common platforms. We need some way of making this connectivity together. We have to overcome the horror stories about incompatibility. Well, we would have shared that with you, but we're on a different frequency. Or our database statewide system is not compatible with your statewide system. Sorry, we can't transfer it. So one of my points, and I will point to Claudia to give us a solution, is that we've got to make sure that, first of all, we can network and tap into this, and I think that's the first goal. The second is who should be part of this, who should be doing it. I'm going to give you the academic answer. I see this as beneficial no matter what sector you're in, no matter what industry category or what level you are. The point of it is to improve our ability to connect and coordinate and collaborate, to improve the reliability, accuracy, and redundancy of information, and to get us collaborating at a level so we can make better decisions and communicate those decisions with more confidence and make decisions that actually improve and enhance. And that's really it. And I see that at work in the public sector, private sector. I can see that working whether you're at a university as I am, whether you're in healthcare, government, if you're in a major corporation, business. You need to be connected to all these other sources. You need to know real time. You need to have a way of knowing to no longer rely on that hospital because the surge has overwhelmed their capacity. And how do you find that out? Are you going to wait for a whole cycle for the note to come out or the notification, or wait and read it in the paper tomorrow? I mean, or are you going to be networked to know that quicker, sooner, faster, with more sense of confidence and reliability? And that's what it is. So really, the questions people say, well, I don't know who I'm connected to, or whatever, and I think that's something you've got to sort out. Who should be at each level? Should we be connected to whom? And I think it starts looking internally. I think you're talking about better networking within your own organization. I think then you're reaching out to look at your constituents and then building out those kinds of things. And then once you decide who should be in it, let's address the connectivity issues. How do we exchange this? How do I tap in? How do I keep more eyes and ears on the ground, and what do I do with it? How do I synthesize that data and make it part of my decision process? I think those are the kinds of questions that I would just say, I put the title concerns there, but really they're implementation issues. They're the what next, where do we go? And I think that they're great questions. None of them are questions that undermine the rationale for doing it. They're really how do we best move forward in terms of doing it. So the problems of communication, we know that well from research. We need to enhance both our information that we get, and we need to increase our ability to connect with others to ensure that we can make decisions and use information quickly, reliably, accurately, in very trying circumstances. The idea of networking beyond traditional channels is what I'm introducing here as a concept from an academic standpoint, and I do think it completely will change how we look at giving information, getting information, surveillance, retrieval, processing, discarding, verifying. I really think we're at a phase here where we have a whole new approach to doing it in terms of coming together. All right, I used some of Claudia's time. Let me pass it over to Claudia and talk more about the coordination of crisis management. And let me make sure I push the right button and move back over. And I'll be here, and I'll be here looking forward to the Q&A as we go forward. Claudia?
Hey, thank you, Dr. Chandler, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending upon your time zone. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time with you this morning and talk about how Everbridge helps you connect the dots during certain, events where, communication is of utmost importance. And a great example is the Boston Marathon bombing. I think most people are obviously familiar with this event. The Boston Marathon, has over 26,000 entrants and 500,000 spectators. And during the course of the Boston Marathon bombing, there were really two major pieces to this event. There was the explosion itself, and then there was the manhunt for the perpetrators that followed that same week. So that during the course of those 5 days, communication and establishing a network of trusted sources was critical. And just to give you an example of communication during that timeline, you can see that communication not only involved all of the emergency responders that first day of the explosion, which was critical, but also involved many other participants. All the public facilities during that day that had to be closed and locked down, the Boston Library, the convention centers, public transportation. Also, communication extended around corporations who, had offices in the area of the bombing, and it was imperative that they get an understanding of where were all their employees. Many employees had left their office building to go watch the marathon, so ensuring the safety, or they had participants who were actually running in the marathon, ensuring the safety of their employees was critical. So during that, the event of the marathon day itself, the communication was multifaceted. It also involved, hospitals, etc. When we move into the second phase of the Boston Marathon event, communication, became again very critical. As the suspects were at large, we had to shut down 3 cities and towns. So you can see that the city of Boston, the town of Watertown, the city of Waltham all used the Everbridge solution to issue shelter-in-place notifications to their citizens. And ensure that things like, everyone was aware that the T was closed, public transportation, etc. Likewise, in parallel, there were campus lockdowns that had to occur within the Boston area. The hospitals had to understand that, that there were wounded people that were going to arrive. There were the potential of other incidents because we knew that there were bombs that were out there that were not found, etc. So you can see that during this event, there was a network of communication that had to occur, and we're going to talk about, some of the techniques around how to really make communication during events like this the most effective, possible. And I think Dr. Chandler had some, great words to say about, leveraging all of the sources that you can to create and share intelligence. And so from an Everbridge perspective, we really focus on 3 layers, so to speak, of intelligence that you can leverage during a crisis situation. And Dr. Chandler talked about these as well. So the first is that frontline intelligence. How do you collect frontline intelligence from your private network? These are your trusted sources, your staff members, your employees, etc. Social intelligence. How do you leverage and monitor social media so that you can, paint a broader picture of what's occurring during a situation and, understand what's happening, on the ground so that you can make more informed decisions and sharpen your own communication to your constituents. And then the third is all around local intelligence. And this is around being able to leverage other Everbridge customers that are, also communicating with their constituents and being able to communicate among each other. So being able to aggregate information from public safety, hospitals, utilities, corporations. And we'll just step through a few examples of these and take a look at what each of them mean in more detail. So frontline intelligence, how do you really get the most out of your own staff and employees? I think that Dr. Chandler, mentioned the whole notion of, trust and verify. And, I think this is critical. So as an organization, you can leverage Everbridge's two-way mobile communications to understand exactly what's happening on the ground. And I think the key here is the notion of two-way. You may, in the event of, for example, a fire, you can send out a notification to your staff to understand, are they safe, are they hurt, do they need help, etc. And you can receive that communication, that two-way communication back, and you can understand, well, where everyone is at, and also you can get pictures of what's happening. So, if, a picture paints 1,000 words. A picture of the fire is certainly, way more valuable than a really long description. So leveraging this two-way communication, you can get, not only the status of individuals, but a little more information and very accurate information on what's happening on the ground. As we move to that next layer of intelligence, let's look at a few examples of social intelligence. So this is around citizens on the ground, right, who are commenting on events and taking pictures of things that, maybe the public safety officials haven't even arrived yet. So you're getting the first look at, what's actually occurring. An example here is, again, the Boston Marathon. When the Watertown lockdown occurred, the media wasn't even allowed, in the area of Watertown, but you could see from citizens on the ground exactly what was happening. You can see in these pictures that were taken where the bomb squads were actually going from house to house and, looking on buildings, on sheds, etc., and really getting a close look. And you could understand where was the squad because you could look at all the geographic tweets and understand and get a better idea of exactly what was happening, from a citizen's perspective. Now, I think it's also important to note that this information is great, and I think Dr. Chandler alluded to this as well. But, just like, the game of telephone or whatever, sometimes social media can provide information that's false. And sometimes as an authority, it's important for you to know false information that's being leaked out so that you can correct that as well. So this is really twofold to understand, what's happening on the ground. The first is to get better information, and the second is to squelch any rumors that may, cause, behavior that you don't really, want to occur. Another example of geo-targeting and social intelligence is, during the Boston Marathon, during that second phase of trying to capture the last suspect, you notice that there's a geo-tagged tweet that said, just heard a bunch of shots. And that was actually occurring right where the boat was where Zohar Tsarnaev was hiding out at 67 Franklin Street in Watertown. So again, this kind of information was coming sooner, and we were able to access it through Everbridge, even before the media was reporting on it, because we had that on-the-ground information. And finally, the ability to leverage your local network and local intelligence. And this is really a network of trusted information sources where you're able to connect with your key constituents, whether that's by location, whether it's sharing what's happening with industries. Airports across the country is a great example of people with aligned interests, and being able to understand who is communicating what to their constituents, so that as a network of trusted sources, you can remain in sync. You can leverage with what each of you are sharing, and you're really always getting the up-to-date information from these sources. Now, it's important to note that Everbridge just announced the network effect in September, and the ability is there as Everbridge customers for you to listen to, to publish notifications and to choose to listen to those notifications. So you can just be someone who, as a business, you may not want to publish notifications, but you want to understand what the local authorities are saying. So you have the option to configure this to connect with who you think is most important. And likewise, it can be on these three axes, whether it's proximity, everyone in the Boston area, for example, during the Boston Marathon, by industry, or by some other similar or aligned interest. Airports across the nation is another example. So as a participant of the Everbridge network, you can filter to find notifications really quickly by category. A great example is a utility that is announcing a power outage and providing updates around that power outage. As part of the Everbridge network, you can also post to the network a polygon. So within an interactive dashboard, you can leverage specifically, the visual impact of the area where the power outage is actually occurring. And you'll be able to understand, when additional crews are coming, when they expect the power outage to be resolved, etc. And this can go for, any kind of notification. And so with that, you're able to communicate with your own constituents that may be impacted, by a particular event. So because the interactive dashboard is not only a way to visualize the situational intelligence around events and notifications coming from your trusted sources, it's also connected to your own contacts. And you can easily, select a polygon and quickly, communicate with those that are impacted by, any event. In this example, it was, the power outage. So just in closing, Everbridge, we've provided these solutions for over 10 years. We have over 1,500 customers across many different verticals, which makes the richness of the Everbridge network even more critical and important when it comes to sharing and really leveraging that network. So I would encourage you to reach out to us, and we're happy to help you with any of your critical communications requirements or needs. So with that, I will turn it over to Erin, who will take us through the questions and answers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Claudia and Dr. Chandler. So just as a reminder, at this point, we're going to open it up to questions from our audience. You may submit your questions by typing a question into the open text field in the questions panel and submitting it to all panelists. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. So our first question actually comes in through Twitter, The question is, can the network effect ever slow down response in a crisis? Dr. Chandler, do you want to?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was just talking away. I'm back. Sorry. Yes, there's a good example. I'm the example. Of course, if not managed correctly, any process could slow it down. Yes, so it is just as susceptible as whatever protocols you use, or just as susceptible as whatever vetting product. Sure, yes. I think the key would be to design as best you can, and then of course revise and modify the way you utilize it, how you utilize it. I think the other thing is that we have what we call a comfort level with making decisions with increasing levels of information. We actually measure it in reverse. We call it the lack of information, so it's called the uncertainty principle. And I do think you have to be comfortable making decisions with some degree of uncertainty. You won't know if we're 100% certain. And so part of it involves creating procedures and processes that best utilize it. You train with it, you revise those, you update those. You also train people on how to do it, how to make the decisions. But the simple answer to your question is, of course, the network effect, like any protocol or steps or vigilant decision making or whatever you use, it most certainly the process itself could become a delay factor. The question is, can you design it, implement it, revise it, and train on it to minimize that impact?
Yeah, and just to add to that, this is Claudia. I think it's key what Dr. Chandler is saying around designing processes and having the ability to leverage that information as best as possible. From an Everbridge perspective, that's why in our interactive visibility dashboard, we provide a lot of mechanisms to filter information that you don't want to see very easily. And you can set those filters up so that they're running all the time. You can add them on the fly. So from a Boston Marathon perspective, you might want to add, and capture new information with different kinds of filters. That flexibility is there, both from a social media perspective and leveraging, the Everbridge network of customers as well. You may not really care what utilities say, but you really want to focus in on what the local hospitals are reporting, et cetera. So we provide that rich capability to help leverage the information as efficiently as possible so that it doesn't slow you down.
Great, and that's a great segue into our next questions. We actually had two similar questions come in. One was, how do you determine the threshold of information sharing between organizations? And then related to that, how do you utilize the network effect effectively and not produce information overload? Yeah, so I'll take the... Oh,
go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, I'll take the first question around how do you... can you just repeat the first one, Erin?
Yeah, the first one was, how do you determine the threshold of information sharing between organizations?
Yeah, so the question around the threshold of information between organizations. As organizations participate in the Everbridge network, first of all, they have to be sanctioned by Everbridge to participate. So not, we don't want extraneous information that's non-relevant going out there. Once organizations are part of the Everbridge network, they choose who they want to publish information to, and not every notification is published automatically. You selectively publish notifications. And likewise, if you're part of the network, you can selectively listen to various constituents of the network as well. So you can choose across industries, and location, who and what you want to listen to. And then further to that, you can actually filter on the fly those messages. So there's a lot of mechanisms in place to ensure that you're not overwhelmed.
I would hitchhike on that and suggest conceptually, what you're trying to do is determine what your functional needs are, both in terms of what you need from others and what you think others would need from you, what you push in that sense. So I would start with a functional analysis of what do you need. I don't think you always need everything. In fact, can't imagine any communication system, whether it's with a significant other or not. You don't want to know everything. What you want is the things that you need to know when you need to know them. Now, you ask about thresholds. I'm going to give you an academic answer because I'm an academic. I teach in my lectures the principle called the point of diminishing returns, and I realize it's a little abstract. Claudia gave you a very functional answer. Turn the switch on or off depending on what you want. Filter it to what you want. That's a very useful, high utilitarian answer. Theoretically, what you're trying to find is the point of diminishing returns. You should continue to get information and new information added to your inbound and outbound information load to the extent that it continues to be useful in shaping your decisions, shaping your collaboration, or affecting what you in turn are communicating to others. At the theoretical point where it's no longer useful, it's reached the point of diminishing returns. It's no longer really changing what you do, how you do it, what you say, when you say it, and what you're saying, then you certainly no longer need to pursue that information. Now that's my theoretical model for what you're doing. How you implement it, I'd go back to Claudia's answer. I mean, you begin to filter it based upon at what point is the information a diminished return. It's no longer getting used, it's just getting in your way time after time. Now, how do you know this? You test, you train, you work on this, you learn from experience. I tend to err to bringing in more information until I know for certain, hey, we don't even use that. We've been getting that. It's never once affected what we're doing. We know we could turn it back on if we needed it. Let's filter that out. That's a point of diminishing return.
Great, thank you. So the next question is actually, can you take me through a quick example of how Everbridge and I'm assuming the network effect would work in an active shooter situation, for example?
Yeah, so let's imagine that a corporation has an active shooter situation. The first thing that they're going to want to do is lock down their facility and reach out to their to their folks to ensure that everyone is as safe as possible. When that message goes out from Everbridge, they can post that to the Everbridge network so that local hospitals, other emergency staff, etc., can get that information in parallel. As the situation unfolds, if there's fatalities or injuries, etc., the Everbridge network can be used to update that and also prepare local hospitals, etc., for incoming victims, so that they can have trauma people ready, etc. And likewise, if the situation is resolved, that can be communicated as well, etc. And it would just enable everyone to be as prepared as possible.
Great, excellent. So I think we probably have time for just one or two more questions. This one is, can you talk about the integration with external or internal feeds of information, like weather, internal systems?
Yeah, sure. So Everbridge has an open platform, so we enable you to look at not only social media feeds, but also weather. So we have a very rich weather application, which enables you to get up-to-date information and polygons in the visual dashboard of over 100 different weather events. We also have an open API, so you can trigger notifications based on any alerts coming from other systems, etc. Whether it's an ITSM system and an external alarm system, we can trigger notifications based on any of those things.
Great, excellent. So I think, looking at the time, I think we're just about out of time for the questions. Certainly, if there was anything that came in, I know we had a lot of questions that we didn't get to. We will do our best to follow up with you after the session. So I just want to take a moment to thank both Dr. Chandler and Claudia for a great session, and to thank all of our attendees who were able to join us today. So as a reminder, if you missed any part of the webinar, be sure to look for the slides on everbridge.com/blog, and we'll also be sending out an email with a link to the recording and the slides in the coming days. If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us on Twitter at Everbridge. I have some fantastic tweets during this session. And make sure you join our group on LinkedIn, Everbridge Incident Management and Emergency Notification Professionals. So for those of you interested in requesting a demo of the new Everbridge system, please visit everbridge.com/request-demo. And thank you all again for your participation in today's Expert Insights webinar, The Network Effect, Connecting the Dots with Crisis Communication. And we hope to see you all again online soon. Thank you so much.